Hi, you're listening to one of the books in the series 20-Minute Book Summaries by Poppy Finds on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts about this book, along with other book recommendations to add to this series. Chapter 1. Don't Try. The book opens not with encouragement or feel-good advice, but with a big, blunt contradiction of what we're used to hearing. Mark Manson doesn't tell us to chase our dreams or believe in ourselves. He tells us that trying too hard might actually be part of the problem. From the start, he makes it clear that this won't be your typical self-help guide. Manson introduces the story of Charles Bukowski, a poet and novelist who led a messy, self-destructive life full of failure, alcoholism, and womanizing. Bukowski never tried to be inspirational. He didn't pretend to care about being successful in the traditional sense. And yet he became wildly successful by embracing who he was, not by trying to be someone else. His tombstone reads, "Don't try." That's not about laziness, it's about honesty. It's about not pretending to be happy, successful, or perfect just because the world expects it. Manson builds his argument by tearing into the culture of toxic positivity. He says our constant push to be happy is what makes us unhappy. Here comes one of the book's most famous lines. The desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience. And paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experience is itself a positive experience. That's the paradox of trying. The harder you chase the good, the more you reinforce the belief that you lack it. This idea is backed by the philosopher Alan Watts, who described it as the backwards law. Manson also introduces the idea of the feedback loop from hell. When you feel bad about feeling bad, or anxious about being anxious, and it spirals. The pressure to be exceptional, to always be winning, just leads people to feel worse about their ordinary lives. He points out that statistically, most people are average, and that's not a bad thing. What's harmful is pretending otherwise. The chapter ends by laying out the book's core idea. You only have so many fucks to give, so stop wasting them on things that don't matter. Manson isn't telling us not to care about anything. He's telling us to choose wisely what we care about. We should be more deliberate about our attention, our emotions, and our values. This sets the tone for the chapters that follow, where he'll help us figure out what's actually worth giving a fuck about. Chapter 2. Happiness is a problem. This chapter takes a wrecking ball to the common belief that happiness is something you achieve once everything in your life is perfect. Manson argues that happiness isn't a destination. It's a constant, messy process that involves struggle, setbacks, and solving problems. Wanting a life without problems is like wanting a body without organs. It's not only impossible, it misses the point. Manson starts by challenging the idea that happiness comes from success, wealth, or even love. He says that happiness is created through solving problems. In fact, humans are hardwired to look for problems because we grow through them. So the question isn't, how do I avoid problems, but rather, what kind of problems do I want to solve? This shift in mindset is crucial. The moment we accept that life is a series of ongoing issues and we get to choose which ones we want to tackle, we start gaining control over our own happiness. This is where one of the chapter's core ideas comes in. Life is essentially an endless series of problems. The solution to one problem is merely the creation of the next one. Solving a problem doesn't mean you're done. It just leads to newer, hopefully better problems. And that's good. That's growth. Manson also makes a key distinction between fault and responsibility. He says that, while it may not be your fault that you have a certain problem, it is still your responsibility to deal with it. If you get hit by a drunk driver, it's not your fault, but it's still your life to live afterward. How you respond is what matters most. Taking responsibility for your emotions and choices gives you power, even in situations you didn't ask for. The chapter closes by tying everything back to values. Manson suggests that the problems you face are directly connected to what you value most. If your values suck, your problems will suck too. But if your values are strong, like honesty, humility, or connection, your problems will still exist, but they'll be worth it. So the goal isn't to eliminate struggle, but to struggle for things that matter. And that's where happiness really lives. Chapter 3. You are not special. In this chapter, Mark Manson aims directly at the self-esteem movement and the cultural obsession with being unique, extraordinary, and wildly successful. He argues that telling everyone they're special has created a generation of entitled people. People who expect rewards without effort, praise without achievement, and meaning without sacrifice. Manson explores how society's constant messaging that you can be anything or you're amazing just the way you are has a dark side. While well-intentioned, these ideas often backfire, making people feel inadequate for living ordinary lives. The fear of being average has become so strong that people would rather pretend to be exceptional than actually work toward meaningful goals. Instead of facing their insecurities or failures, they mask them behind delusions of greatness or victimhood. Here's where Manson drops one of his best lines. Entitlement strips away people's ability to identify their own problems and thus to solve them. He says people either believe they're so great that they shouldn't have to deal with problems, or that they're so uniquely broken that no one else could possibly understand their pain. Both of these mindsets lead to the same dead end, avoiding responsibility and blaming the world. He also introduces the idea that most of us are average, and statistically speaking, that's just how it works. But that's not a bad thing. Being average doesn't mean your life lacks meaning. In fact, embracing ordinariness can be freeing. You stop constantly comparing yourself to others, and instead focus on doing what matters to you. Growth and fulfillment don't come from being special, they come from being real. Manson wraps up by encouraging readers to stop trying to be extraordinary and instead find meaning in ordinary experiences. He warns that the pressure to always be exceptional leads people to unrealistic expectations and deep dissatisfaction. True self-improvement, he argues, is born from humility, not from believing you're special, but from realizing you're not. And from that grounded place, you can start doing the work that actually improves your life. Chapter 4. The Value of Suffering. This chapter digs into a tough truth. We're all going to suffer, but what we suffer for makes all the difference. Mark Manson challenges us to examine our values because the values we live by determine the meaning we give to our pain. In short, pain is inevitable, but pointless suffering is a choice. Manson kicks things off by making a clear argument. Life is filled with struggle, and we need to stop wishing it away. Instead, we need to get better at choosing the kind of pain we're willing to endure. He gives examples of how different people tolerate different hardships. Some willingly go through grueling hours of training for a sport. Others suffer for creative work, or parenthood, or relationships. The key is that they're all suffering, but for something they believe is worth it. Then comes a standout quote. Who you are is defined by what you're willing to struggle for. This flips the common motivational message on its head. It's not just about what you want out of life. It's about what pain you're willing to sustain to get there. Everyone wants to be rich, healthy, and successful. But not everyone wants to work late nights, feel rejected, or sweat through failures. That's where the real difference lies. Manson also revisits the idea of values, saying that if your values suck, your suffering will feel pointless. He uses the example of a man obsessed with being popular and admired, but who ends up miserable and self-destructive because admiration is a shallow value. On the other hand, someone who values personal growth might still struggle, but they'll find meaning in the pain. Pain isn't the enemy, misguided meaning is. The chapter ends by driving home the point that pain is unavoidable, but it can be empowering when connected to a good value. You have to ask yourself, why am I suffering? What am I choosing this pain for? If the answer is tied to strong, personal values, like honesty, connection, growth, then that suffering becomes a path to fulfillment. In that way, your pain becomes your power. Chapter 5. You are always choosing. This chapter is all about the power of responsibility, and not the boring, adulting kind. Manson reframes it as personal freedom. He argues that we might not control what happens to us, but we always control how we respond. In fact, that's where all our power lives. Taking full ownership of our reactions is the ultimate way to stop wasting fucks on things we can't change. Manson begins by talking about a brutal reality. Bad things happen. Random, unfair, sometimes downright cruel things. But here's the twist. You're still responsible for how you react to them. He's not saying it's your fault. He's making a sharp distinction. Fault is past tense, but responsibility is present tense. And that's a key shift. You can't control whether someone rear-ends your car or breaks your heart, but you can choose what to do next. One of the most quoted lines from the book drops here. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret what happens to us as well as how we respond. This quote sums up the whole idea. Victimhood might feel comforting short-term, but it gives away all your power. Responsibility is scary, but freeing. Manson uses the powerful story of Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist who endured unthinkable suffering and still found purpose. Frankl realized that no one can take away your ability to choose your response. Even in a concentration camp, he found meaning by choosing how to face his suffering. That level of responsibility isn't about blame. It's about reclaiming control in a world that often feels chaotic. Manson wraps the chapter by emphasizing that everything you experience is ultimately a result of your own choices. Even if the events weren't your fault, how you respond shapes your reality. Blaming the world might feel good temporarily, but it doesn't change anything. Taking responsibility, on the other hand, puts the power back in your hands. And when you start doing that consistently, your values shift, your problems improve, and you waste fewer and fewer fucks on things that don't matter. Chapter 6. You're wrong about everything, but so am I. This chapter is one big, humbling truth bomb. Manson tells us, bluntly, that we're wrong about a lot of things, maybe even everything. But instead of that being terrifying, he shows how embracing our wrongness is actually the foundation of growth. Being wrong isn't failure. It's progress in disguise. Manson begins by tackling our obsession with certainty. We love being right. We cling to our beliefs like life rafts, even if they're slowly sinking. But here's the deal. Clinging to certainty closes you off from learning. Manson says that growth only happens when you admit you might be wrong. The moment you say, I could be wrong, you open the door to new perspectives, better choices, and a more honest life. Then comes the quote that hits like a punch and a hug all at once. The more something threatens your identity, the more you will avoid it. It explains why we defend bad ideas, toxic relationships, and stupid decisions. Because admitting we were wrong would feel like we are wrong, and that bruises the ego. But Manson says ego isn't your friend, it's your roadblock. He gets into how our beliefs shape our values, and our values shape our reality. If your values suck, like needing to always be right, you'll avoid important but uncomfortable truths. But if your values are better, like curiosity, honesty, and humility, you'll start asking better questions instead of defending bad answers. It's not about finding the truth once and for all. It's about getting a little less wrong every day. The chapter closes with a mic drop idea. Certainty is the enemy of growth. If you want to grow, improve, and give fewer fucks about pointless drama, you've got to get comfy with being wrong. Manson says the goal isn't to be right all the time. It's to keep evolving. Every belief you hold should be on the table, ready to be questioned. That's how progress happens. One uncomfortable truth at a time. Chapter 7. Failure is the way forward. Manson comes in swinging in this chapter with a message most of us are conditioned to avoid. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the path to it. While we're busy trying to dodge mistakes, he's over here shouting, trip and fall. Screw it up. You'll learn faster. And honestly, it makes sense. The chapter begins by challenging our typical view of failure. Manson says we're taught to fear it, to see it as shameful, embarrassing, or something to avoid at all costs. But he flips that narrative entirely. Failure is how we grow. He even says action isn't just the effect of motivation, it's also the cause, which means you don't have to wait to feel ready. Just start, even if you're terrible, especially if you're terrible. And then he drops this banger. If someone is better than you at something, it's likely because they failed at it more than you have. Read that again. That YouTuber, artist, writer, athlete, whoever. You see the polished result, but you didn't see the garbage drafts, the flops, the 3 a.m. crying into pizza moments. Greatness is built on a garbage mountain of past failures. Manson introduces the do something principle, which is a game changer for anyone stuck in the motivational waiting room. It goes like this: action to inspiration, then motivation, not the other way around. You don't need to be inspired to act. You just need to start moving. That tiny movement creates momentum, and momentum builds motivation. You start because you act, not because you feel like it. By the end, Manson has drilled this point home hard. Failing doesn't make you a failure. Quitting or avoiding the process does. The people who succeed aren't the ones who get it right the first time. They're the ones who keep screwing up and keep going. The key is to fail better each time. Progress is built on screw-ups stacked like bricks, and every L is a stepping stone. So stop fearing failure. Fuck up gloriously, and then keep going. Chapter 8. The importance of saying no. This chapter is all about something deceptively simple, but massively hard for most people: setting boundaries and saying no. Manson argues that the strength of your life isn't measured by how many yeses you say, but by how confidently you say no to the wrong things, because giving a FCK about everything is the same as giving a FK about nothing. Manson starts with a bold statement: commitment is liberating. We tend to think freedom means keeping our options open. But according to him, real freedom comes from saying no to distractions, temptations, and choices that don't align with our core values. It's not about being agreeable, it's about being honest. Then he hits us with this sharp quote: the avoidance of rejection, both giving and receiving it, is often sold to us as a way to make ourselves more likable or marketable, but in reality it makes us superficial and uninteresting. Basically, if you never say no, you become bland, vanilla, a people pleaser without a spine, and no one respects that, not even you. He dives into why rejection is a necessary part of relationships: romantic, platonic, and professional. Healthy relationships aren't about saying yes all the time or avoiding conflict. They're built on mutual respect, and that means being able to say no and handle someone else's no without losing your mind. Manson shares personal stories about relationships where lack of boundaries turned into emotional messes, and shows how clarity, even if it stings, is better than passive-aggressive avoidance. Manson ends by reinforcing that every yes is also a no to something else. So if you say yes to crappy jobs, draining friendships, or values that don't align with yours, you're saying no to your own potential. Rejection isn't cruelty, it's honesty. And when you get really good at saying no to the wrong things, your life gets way better, way faster. Fewer fucks given, more meaning gained. Chapter 9. And then you die. Okay, yes, Manson really saved the heaviest for last. This chapter dives into death, but not in a depressing, everything is meaningless way. It's actually the emotional climax of the book. He argues that facing death is the only way to truly live. Because when you accept that your time and energy are limited, you start choosing what really matters. You start giving a fuck, selectively, intentionally, meaningfully. Manson starts by telling the story of his friend Josh, who died unexpectedly at a young age. That death shattered Manson's world and forced him to confront the reality that none of us are guaranteed time. That moment cracked open a whole new way of thinking. What do I care about, really? What would matter if I died tomorrow? He calls this the death of the self and says it's what sets the stage for real transformation. Then comes one of the most profound lines in the book: you will die, and that's because you were fortunate enough to have lived. It's not morbid, it's grounding. Manson says most of us distract ourselves from death: scrolling, binging, chasing status, numbing feelings. But when we look death in the eye and accept it, not run from it, that's when we stop wasting our lives on trivial nonsense. He talks about how many philosophical and spiritual systems throughout history have focused on death as the key to enlightenment. Why? Because once you accept that your time is limited, it forces you to get really brutally honest about what actually deserves your energy. You stop trying to impress strangers, you stop holding grudges, you stop procrastinating on being the kind of person you actually want to be. In a weird twist, death becomes the best motivator. Manson wraps up the book with the idea that our legacy is how we live right now, not what we leave behind. And the best thing we can do with our short time here is to choose our values wisely, give our fucks with care, and leave behind a wake of honesty, growth, and love, not drama and regret. Life is short, brutal, hilarious, and precious. So stop wasting time. Start living like you mean it.